Okay, chops, chop, chop, chops. Okay, let's have some fun with chops. And when you're done with this tutorial, you're going to have this blue circle on the screen that is oscillating in radius, and it's moving from left to right as the clock of your computer advances. And this circle is going to change color when you press the number 1 on your keyboard. So let's do this tutorial right now. So what are chops? Chops are channel operators. So that just means it's an operator that includes a channel, but more specifically, it's an operator that has a channel that outputs data that we can use in another operator. So let's just take a quick look at what are some examples of chops. An example of a chop is a constant operator. If you look on my screen here, that's a constant operator. It just outputs a constant number or value. We also have a MouseIn CHOP that will take data as you move the mouse, and it will output that data, such as the X and Y. We have a noise chop that generates random data. So without overcomplicating things, let's do a quick example here. And we're just going to go to section number 1 here, which is how to add chops. I'm just going to show you a really quick example of chops. So just double click on the empty grid area of TouchDesigner to open the OP Create dialog. Make sure you're in the chops category. And from here, let's just click on LFO. So click on LFO and then place LFO anywhere in TouchDesigner. And after you place that LFO, you can see that this is generating a number that is oscillating because LFO stands for low frequency oscillator. So we're just going to add one more operator just to the right of this, just to show you a super quick, super simple, easy example of chops. So let's double click on the empty grid area. And from the OP Create dialog, let's click on the top category this time. So under top, just go ahead and click on the word circle. So just place that circle somewhere to the right of your LFO operator, right about there. And what we're going to do, we're just going to drop this chop into this circle so that it changes the radius of this circle. So let's do that right now. And the first thing we need to do to drop this chop onto this circle is we need to press this Viewer Active button in the bottom right corner of the LFO chop. So just press that little button that says Viewer Active in the bottom right corner of the LFO. So we click on that button. Now I'm going to zoom out, and at this point, just make sure you have that circle selected. So go ahead and click on that circle so that we see the green border around that. And then we can see the parameters for this circle in the top right-hand corner of TouchDesigner right about here. And what we're going to do, we're just going to drop the chop, or that LFO operator, we're going to drop that right onto the radius parameter of our circle. So we're just going to drop this right onto the word radius right here. So I'm going to zoom out to show you how we do that. What we're going to do is hover over this LFO operator right here. And what we're going to do is just click and drag and drop this LFO operator onto the radius parameter of our circle. So let's do that right now. So like I said, just hover over this LFO operator, click that, hold down the mouse, and drag that onto the word radius of our circle operator. So just drop that onto the word radius right there, and then just click on this little button that says Export Chop. And now you can see that the radius of our circle is not a static number anymore. That is a dynamic value. And if we zoom out, we can see that is responding to the LFO operator that we placed right before our circle. And as you can see in the circle operator itself, you can see the radius oscillating very quickly. And just a quick side note, after we dropped this LFO operator onto the circle's radius parameter, it basically made this little line connecting LFO to circle, this little kind of faint gray line, so that we can just see that this LFO is now acting upon the circle operator. And one more quick side note, the default frequency of this LFO operator is pretty fast. So what I'm going to do is turn off the Viewer Active button for the LFO operator, so click on that. And then I'm going to click on the LFO operator so that that operator is selected. Now I'm going to zoom out and I'm going to go to the parameters of this LFO operator right in the top right-hand corner right here. And I'm just going to go to this frequency parameter, click on this little slider right here and drag this down to something much slower like 0.2. So our frequency is much slower now. If we zoom out, we can see that that number is oscillating much more slowly, and the radius of our circle is changing at a much slower rate, which is not quite so crazy. So that is the most basic example of a chop that I can really think of that actually does something that's kind of cool in TouchDesigner. So just a quick recap, we went over what are chops, how to add them, and a basic chop example, which was this LFO operator. Okay, let's do one more quick example for a basic chop. So a keyboard in chop is pretty basic. It just takes input from the keyboard. So let's add that chop right now. I'm just going to double click on the empty canvas area in TouchDesigner. And then from the OP Create dialog, I'm going to click on the chop category. And then I'm just going to go to this keyboard in operator, click on that, and drop that in TouchDesigner. I'm going to zoom out. Let's just take a look at the parameters for the keyboard in operator. So in the top right-hand corner of TouchDesigner here, let's zoom in. And if you look at the parameters for this keyboard in operator, you can see there's an area that says keys. The keys that you want this keyboard in operator to react to. So by default, the key 1 is in there. So if I zoom out, I'll show you what that means. So what I'm going to do is just press the number 1 on my keyboard. And if you look at the keyboard in operator here, we can see that when I press the number 1 on my keyboard, the operator outputs a value. So I'm just pressing the number 1 on the keyboard very quickly and now very slowly and holding that down. So that just responds exactly to pressing the key 1. So now if I press 2 on the keyboard, nothing happens. So if we zoom in on the parameters for this keyboard in operator, and then we just add the number 2 into the keys here, what I'm going to do in this keys parameter of the keyboard in operator is just add a comma and then the number 2. And if we zoom out, we're just going to test pressing the number 2 on our keyboard. And as I suspected, that outputs value when we press 2 on our keyboard. So we can press the number 1, we can press the number 2, or we can press them at the same time and have both of these channels output data. So that's great. We have the number 1 and the number 2 responding in TouchDesigner. Now let's use that data to modify our circle. So what I'm going to do is just click on this circle operator, and I'm going to take a look at the parameters of this circle operators just so that we can see what kind of cool stuff we can modify using this keyboard in operator. So I'm just looking at the parameters for our circle operator, and one thing I'd want to do is change the color of the circle if we press the number 1 on our keyboard. So I'm going to just click on some value of this fill color parameter. And I noticed that when I click on this value right here and change this from 1 to 0, that changes to kind of a magenta color. So let's go ahead and drop the keyboard in operator onto this little parameter right here so that our keyboard changes the color of the circle. So let's zoom out. And now what I'm going to do is just click the Viewer Active button on our keyboard in operator, and then I'm going to drop this first channel of our keyboard in operator, the K1 channel. I'm going to drop that channel onto that parameter of our fill color parameter. And I'm going to drop this K1 channel of our keyboard in operator onto this value of our fill color parameter for our circle. So just make sure you have that circle selected. And what we're going to do now is simply just click on the Viewer Active button of our keyboard in operator. So click on that Viewer Active button. And now when we hover over these channels, the channel kind of highlights as green. And I'm going to zoom out. And like I said, we're just going to drag and drop this K1 channel onto this parameter of our circle operator right here, this little box right here. So let's go ahead and hover over the K1 channel of our keyboard in operator. We're going to click and hold down the mouse and drag that and drop that onto this second value of our fill color parameter. So just drop that in that little box right there, and then make sure you click on Export Chop. And as you can see, this box is now green instead of gray, which indicates that this is dynamically being controlled instead of statically. So I'm going to zoom out. And now if we press the number 1 on our keyboard, that should change the color of our circle. So let's go ahead and try pressing the number 1 right now. So now I am pressing the number 1 on the keyboard, and you can see that that changes the color of our circle. And if we observe the parameters for our circle, let's just take a look at that. So let's zoom in on that, and we're just looking at this value that we changed. And when we press 1 on the keyboard, that changes from 0 to 1. So we're just using that keyboard in operator to modify the parameter of our circle. Simple as that. Okay, let's do one more quick chop example with this circle since we're kind of on a roll here. So let's go ahead and double click on the empty canvas area. And then we have the OP Create dialog. What I'm going to do this time is make sure that we are in the CHOP category. And then from the CHOP category, let's just click on clock. So just click on clock and drop that somewhere in the empty grid area here. And if we take a quick look at this clock operator, you can see that it has all these different little colored bars. Well, those are different values for parts of the time. So what I'm going to do basically is zoom out. And let's just get a closer look at this clock operator here. So let's click on the Viewer Active button in the bottom right corner of this clock operator. And then let's kind of drag this clock operator to make that a little bit bigger. And now, once we've dragged that and kind of zoomed in on it, you can see that we have the names of the channels inside this clock operator. So we can see that this one right here is the milliseconds. We have the seconds right below that, minutes, hours, and AM, PM. And then below that, you can see we even have some kind of crazy little channels here that tell you whether it's a leap year or not, the moon phase, sunrise, sunset, and declination. So that's pretty cool stuff there. But for this tutorial, I think I'll focus on something simple like the seconds channel right here. So I'm going to zoom out now that we are familiar with the channels coming out of the clock operator. And what I'm going to do is just use this seconds channel in our circle somehow to modify the parameter of our circle, some parameter of our circle. I'm not sure yet. So let's click on this circle to just kind of play around with this circle and investigate the parameters and see what parameter would be good for combining this seconds channel of our clock operator. So I'm just going to take a look at the parameters of our circle. And when we look at the parameters of our circle, I think the position of the circle would be good to modify with that clock operator. So let's go ahead and drop that seconds channel of our clock operator onto the X value for our center parameter in our circle. So I'm going to zoom out and let's do that right now. So just make sure you have that Viewer Active button clicked so that we can see the channel names in our clock operator. Make sure you have this circle operator selected so that the border is green around that. And then just hover over the seconds channel in our clock operator so that that channel is highlighted green. Just click on that seconds channel, hold down the mouse, and drag that onto the X value of our center parameter in our circle. So just drop that bad boy right there, and then just click on Export Chop. Now you can see the X value of our center parameter. And after we did that, it actually put the circle off of our screen here. So basically the value that is being put into our center parameter here is too large for us to actually still see the circle. So I'm going to do a quick little trick here, and I'm just going to add a math operator after our clock operator to modify the value that's coming out of that. So what I'm going to do is turn off the Viewer Active button on our clock operator. And then I'm going to hover over the output of our clock operator, and then I'm going to right click on that output of our clock operator. And now in the CHOP category, I'm going to click on math. So just click on math and then drop math somewhere to the right of your clock. And now zoom out, and we're going to look in the parameters of our math operator. So I'm going to zoom in on our parameters. And I'm going to click on this tab that says multiply add right here. So click on that tab, and I'm just going to change the multiply parameter right here. And I'm going to change this from 1 to 0.05. So there's 0.05. And now if we look and zoom out, if we look at the values coming out of this math operator, it's much smaller than the values from our clock operator. So now let's just click on the Viewer Active button for our math operator, and we're just going to drag and drop the seconds value of our math operator onto our circle. So we're just going to hover over the seconds value of our math operator now instead of our clock operator. So now we're just going to use this seconds value of our math operator, and we're going to click on that, drag that, and drop that onto the X value of our center parameter in our circle. So just drop that right on there and click on Export Chop. And now you can see the values for this center parameter are much smaller than they were before. And we can even see that now in TouchDesigner. So you can see that the circle is now visible. So let's click on the display button of our circle operator. There's the display button right there. Let's just click on that. And that shows our operator in the background of TouchDesigner. And if you look in the background of TouchDesigner, there is our circle right there. And it's moving to the right as lock operator progresses in seconds. So now our circle operator is visible in the background. And if we wanted to make sure that circle is on the screen pretty much all the time, we could just modify the parameters of our math operator down here. So to do that, we could just click on this viewer active button to turn that off for our math operator. And then we click on our math operator to select that. And then we could just change this multiply operator to, I don't know, let's add another 0. So it's 0.005. And now our circle should be visible no matter what. And it's changing, it's moving to the right slowly. So that's just a quick example of the clock operator in combination with the math operator for chops in TouchDesigner. Now let's take a look at our little guide up here and see how we're doing. So we went over what are chops, how to add them. We did a couple of basic examples. And now I'm going to show you a quick example of an advanced chop setup. And last but not least, let's just take a quick look at some more LFO parameters like we started with, and then we're done. So let's check out an advanced chop example right now. So if I scroll down in my TouchDesigner project, eventually we're going to see an example that I set up like yesterday. And this is basically just a MouseIn operator that takes input from the mouse as we move the mouse. So as I move the mouse, you can see that the TX and TY channels of this MouseIn operator change. So as I move left and right, the TX channel changes. And as I move up and down, the TY channel changes. And I even set up this operator to respond to clicking the mouse. So the left mouse button is this L channel of this MouseIn operator here. Then I just added a math operator on the end of our MouseIn operator just to kind of change the values that are being output by our mouse operator. And then if you look to the right of our math operator, I added a lag operator to make it so that there's some lag whenever I click the left mouse button, as you see in this L channel of the lag operator, when compared to the L channel of our math operator. And by the way, yesterday I made an entire tutorial video on this MouseIn operator. So if you want to see more about that example and how to make this exact example, just check out the description so you can see the link for that other video that I made. So that's just a quick summary of an advanced chop example. I'm not going to go into detail about that in this video. Like I said, I made an entire video just on using this MouseIn operator. So if you want, you can check that out. Okay, so it's about time to wrap up this tutorial. Let's go ahead and take a look at our guide, and we will see that we just have one more section left, which is LFO parameters. So let's take a look at LFO parameters right now. Okay, so for the last section of this tutorial, I'm just going to focus on the LFO operator. So let's click on this LFO operator right here so that that's selected. And then once that's selected, let's just look at the parameters for this LFO operator. So here are the parameters of our LFO operator. Earlier in this video, we changed the frequency of this LFO operator. So now instead of changing the frequency parameter, let's change the amplitude parameter. So let's go ahead and click on the slider for the amplitude parameter. Let's just move that slider down a little bit so that that's closer to something like 0.2 or 0.3. And if I zoom out, you'll see that that really changed the behavior of what's going on with this circle. So instead of going to really, really huge, now it's growing to a more manageable size. So that's just an example of an easy way to change the parameters for the LFO operator. And since the LFO operator seems to be very, very useful and very common to use, that's why I thought it's important that you should know about the parameters for this LFO operator. So let's take a deeper look at the parameters for this LFO operator. So we modified the frequency, we modified the amplitude. Now let's modify the offset. So I'm going to change this offset. I'm going to click on the slider for that. Drag that up, and as we drag that up, that just adds to the number that's being output by this LFO. So as I drag this up, our circle is going to get larger. One of my favorite parameters for the LFO operator is the type parameter. It's this drop-down menu here. So if you click on this and change this from sine to Gaussian, it basically only outputs a positive value instead of a negative, or this only goes up instead of going up and down. So that sine value for the type parameter outputted a value that would go up and then down. So that would oscillate in the typical definition of the word oscillate. And as opposed to this Gaussian type that only outputs a positive. So anyway, that's just a quick tip for the parameters of LFO operators, is to change the type of LFO operator here. My favorite types are sine and Gaussian, by the way. Those seem to be the two that I use the most. All right, so let's just do one quick little section that I'm going to add into the end of this tutorial, which is just to show you some of the most common chops that I use. So let's double click on the empty grid area here and click on the chops category. And from the chops category, I'm just going to show you just a quick note. Some of the most common chops that I use are LFO, and you can make audio reactive content by using an audio chop. And I have several videos that show you how to do that. So you can look in the description of this video to see those videos about audio reactive stuff. We used the math chop in this video. We used the keyboard in chop in this video. And we even used the lag chop in this video. So those are some of my most commonly used chops. All right, that's it for chops. I hope you got something useful out of this video. If you did, then let me know in the comments or give it a like. If you have any questions, ask in the comments below. Most importantly, have fun with chops and try to make those modify as much cool stuff in TouchDesigner as you can.